If you like my video, please subscribe my channel and don't forget like video. Thank you.
The basic deal, I'm being very crude about this, but is Canada plus the city or something like
Canada
that?
plus as well, probably
Plus.
would be
now,
one way of putting it.
But the pluses are difficult, aren't they? Because, for instance, the French want to steal as much of the city as they possibly can. So the fact that they can...
I wouldn't use that word. That's your word.
That's my word. It's possible, appropriate, grab, whatever, as much of the city as they possibly can. Now, it's perfectly possible that that will make a very difficult negotiation and that cannot be done within 8 months. So if it's not finished within 8 months, what happens?
I don't agree. I mean, it's more like a year than 8 months in truth. Because bear in mind, we can't sign this until after March, until after we actually leave. Maybe 1 minute after we leave, or 1 second after we leave, but the formal technicalities, we can't do that. But we've got about a year, and that was actually why this week was important. That's because if we got... No, let me finish the point. If we had gone through this week...
I've got another this week question.
All right, then, and come back into March, then we really would have been compressed, and I would then be sitting here agreeing with you saying it's difficult to do. So the odds, as it were, against a WTO or no-deal outcome have dropped dramatically.
That's the meaning of this week.
That's right.
Let me ask you what Michael Gove meant when he said that this can all be looked at again at the next general election. If we don't like the deal that David Davis has struck, don't worry, we can go to the voters and strike. That wasn't very helpful, was it?
Well, it's a sort of statement of the obvious that any new government is elected on a mandate of its own. Now, we would be re-elected, I would hope, on the mandate of the deal we've delivered. Any other government might not be, and that's a function of democracy. Of course, that would mean there'll be consequences. You'd have to go back and renegotiate something, whatever. But it's a statement of the obvious. It's a statement of the fact that in Britain, Parliament is sovereign, or at least it will be once we get back to the situation when negotiating.
And what you want is Canada plus.
You're desperately trying to get a headline out of this. What we want is a bespoke outcome. We'll probably start with the best of Canada and the best of Japan and the best of South Korea, and then add to that the bits that's missing, which is the services.
And the key to it, to my mind, is that it is deliverable. Bear in mind, as David says, this has been offered to us by the Commission. They have offered us the best trade deal they have done with any country ever in the world. So if you want to call it Canada Plus or Super Canada or Supercalifragilisticexpialidocious Canada, that is what is being aimed at and it's being offered as long as you can solve the Northern Ireland question, which I think the ERG did a week or so ago. So you've got Northern Ireland solved, you've got a free trade deal, you've got something that is deliverable. So it's not just deliverable in terms of the European Union, it's deliverable in terms of British public opinion, and it's deliverable in terms of parliamentary votes. I think this paper is therefore the most exciting contribution we have had to this debate in many months. It's also clear that the Chequers plan doesn't work. It doesn't work for the UK because it doesn't mean Brexit, and it doesn't work for the European Union because it means, in their rather inelegant phrase, cherry-picking.
OK, you want that Canada-style free trade agreement. She covered that in her statement. Let's just hear what she said about that.
The second option would be a basic free trade agreement for Great Britain that would introduce checks at the Great Britain-EU border. But even worse, Northern Ireland would effectively remain in the customs union and parts of the single market, permanently separated economically from the rest of the UK by a border down the Irish Sea.
OK, Mr Rees Mogg, so she's not going to sign up to that option. She made it quite clear there. We know that Chequers is unacceptable, and we know that the WTO, she believes, is going to be a major economic shock. All those three options are off the table.
I'm sorry. You didn't listen to what I said. I said a Canada-style free trade deal for the whole of the United Kingdom, drawing on the solutions the ERG has proposed for the Irish question. Of course it needs to be for the whole of the United Kingdom, and if you can unlock the Irish question, then that is possible from an EU point of view because it meets their concerns over the integrity of the single market. The Prime Minister was saying no to a plan that nobody wants. That's not something anyone's advocating in the United Kingdom. There's a better plan, which is to have a Canada Plus free trade deal for the whole United Kingdom and solve the Irish problem by looking at what the EU's concerns are in relation to the single market, looking at its rules and how it applies them on other borders and the checks that it has in place, and working out if you can do those away from the border in Ireland, which you can. So there is a solution of that kind, and it's actually the best solution that's likely to be available, much better than Chequers, which means we would still remain subject to European regulations for our industry, which is what people voted not to have.
The one thing I am certain about is that Chequers will not pass the House of Commons.
That's sort of yesterday's argument in a way, isn't it? We've gone beyond that to the question of whether there will be any kind of deal.
Well, we have consistently argued, in fact, we have pleaded with the Prime Minister, and I use the word quite deliberately, Ed, we have pleaded with the Prime Minister to pivot away from Chequers, which so many of our colleagues are adamantly against, and instead to pivot to a free trade arrangement, something often referred to as Super Canada, which Donald Tusk himself last week said the EU would welcome. We believe that's far superior to Chequers, and it has a chance of passing the House of Commons.
This is a slightly notional argument at the moment, because at the moment we're talking about the Irish border, crucially, and it appears that conversation is stuck. And you this morning, I believe, have actually been calling for cabinet ministers to push things along a bit by resigning.
No, I didn't call directly for cabinet ministers to resign, but I did say very clearly that this was time for them to stand up to the Prime Minister, and it was time for them to put their country before their careers.
And if you follow that logic, you presumably mean that they should hold out for something tougher than what we're being offered at the moment, what Britain is being offered at the moment. And it's pretty clear that the European Union isn't budging on the condition of the deal as it now stands.
Well, let's remember what happened in the run-up to Chequers, because that's very germane here. David Davis, as head of Dexu, had spent the best part of 2 years with his civil servants working up a white paper that was based around a free trade agreement, what we would now call Super Canada. At virtually the last minute, that white paper was dropped, and an alternative white paper drafted by Ollie Robbins, a very senior, very pro-EU civil servant, advocating Chequers, was inserted instead. And the cabinet were bounced. And there was all this ridiculous briefing about if you don't like it, there are taxi cards in the lobby at Chequers and you can get a cab home. I mean, what a way to treat your cabinet colleagues. So we believe what the cabinet haven't done, the unexplored option by the cabinet, is to debate the merits of Super Canada relative to Chequers, and if the cabinet wanted to pivot, then the PM would have to follow them.
But we haven't got to that stage yet, have we? I mean, we are stuck on the withdrawal agreement at the moment.
Well, what I'm saying is there is a better option, which, as I said, President Tusk welcomed last week. And we believe the Cabinet should now do what they haven't done at all in this process, which is debate the merits of Super Canada, David Davis's original plan, wherein I think they will find it is superior to Chequers. The senior civil servants who are running this, and they are running this, are trying to drive Chequers through the cabinet remorselessly and then somehow think they can drive it through Parliament. I'm here to tell you, that is not going to happen. Chequers will never get through.
What I have said is that no deal would be better than a bad deal. You talk about a Canada-style deal. Actually, that's not on the table. It's not on the table for the United Kingdom. What is on the table from the European Union is effectively breaking up the United Kingdom by having a trade agreement with Great Britain and keeping Northern Ireland in the most of the single market and the customs union, creating a customs border down the Irish Sea, effectively carving Northern Ireland away from the rest of the United Kingdom. What we've put on the table, what the British government has put on the table, is a proposal that respects the vote of the British people, that delivers what they were voting for, an end to free movement, end to the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice, but does so in a way that protects the Union of the United Kingdom, delivers no hard border for Northern Ireland and Ireland, and protects jobs in the UK.
It's a vexed issue because you get the economists working for the Treasury, the Bank of England, and most of the establishments who say that before the referendum we were going to have a terrible recession immediately after the vote, and it didn't happen. And they're now saying it's going to be terrible over the next few years. You've also had, as the public, strong representations from economists for free trade who say that's wrong. It's going to be plus 7%. So who do you believe? I think you go for economists for free trade who said it's going to be better because they've got a better record. But even if you don't, I think as the public, what you have to do is go back to the basics and look at the maths. And the public's very good at this, and that's why democracy works. And what I say is on the 29th of March, if we have no deal, and I call it free trade, you will immediately be better off by £39 billion. And if I could just make another couple of points, you'll immediately, these are tangible things that you can ignore the economists and weigh up yourself. You can also get control of fishing. That's a tangible thing which you can weigh
Okay,
up.
let's just stick with the money, because that was what the question is about. We may come to fishing later.
This is, David, about the money, because this is the money that people can identify with. And the other thing is, just lastly, you can eliminate the tariffs, the invisible tariffs that you pay on oranges, rice, and 12,000 other products. We collect it here and send it to Europe, so you can reduce prices in the shops, plus add democracy. All those things I think the public can weigh up, and they did before the referendum. And I think we're better off on day one without a deal, and it will continue to get better.
Okay.
That definitely Britain is heading towards a no-deal Brexit. There's no way that she's going to get her EU Brexit deal through Parliament. I don't think there's any appetite within the Conservative Party for a second referendum. There isn't enough parliamentary support for a Norway-style solution, as Ashley referenced earlier. I do believe the only realistic way forward now for Britain is a no-deal Brexit on March 29th, 2019.
Yes.
And certainly under Theresa May's proposal, Britain will be stuck inside the customs union, subject to the rulings of the European Court of Justice. Absolutely unacceptable in my opinion. However, under a no deal, Britain would be completely free of the shackles of the European Union. And why should Britain want to be tied to a sinking EU Titanic, full of high taxes, huge amounts of red tape and regulation, heavy unemployment? Britain is far better off completely outside of the European Union. And as the US ambassador to the United Kingdom said earlier today, that there's a tremendous appetite here in Washington for a US-UK free trade agreement between the world's biggest and fifth largest economies, which would be a force generator for economic prosperity and jobs on both sides of the Atlantic. This is the opportunity that Britain has today, and this is the opportunity that Britain must seize. Okay. Brexit will be great for Britain.
I got to break in here.
It'll be great for America as well.
Who has more to lose from a no-deal Brexit? Is it us, or is it the European Union? If I would just say this from the EU side, because we haven't talked about this much, that no deal has never been seen as a realistic option by the European Union. Indeed, when the Prime Minister occasionally said no deal is better than a bad deal, nobody over there ever really believed her, and that maybe is why Mr Verhofstadt is as angry as he is today. Let's be clear, the European Union would hate Britain to leave on a negotiated no deal. Why? Well, number one, they wouldn't get their 39 billion, and that would not please them at all. Number two, they would come under huge pressure from the car manufacturers, the wine producers, who of course would find their product potentially with tariff if they're selling goods into the UK. But here's the real reason. The real reason why a no-deal Brexit is a horror story for the European Union is we will be outside the rules of the single market and the customs union and free to become competitive. It's the one thing Mr Barnier did not want from day one, did his best to keep us inside that customs union, and I think he felt with the withdrawal agreement that he'd got where he needed to be. And I remember having a conversation with a guy called Hans-Olaf Henkel, who's a German MEP, and he's the former boss of the German equivalent of the CBI. He said, Nigel, what will you do with British businesses once you've got Brexit? I said, well, we'll become competitive. We'll have different laws and rules to all the rest of you. He said, but this can't be allowed to happen. I mean, if you did that, Germany would have to leave. The whole thing would collapse. I said, well, yes, that's the point. So the EU do not like the idea of a no-deal Brexit, and there are many in Britain that don't like the idea of a no-deal Brexit. And I'd be the first to admit that our government I think, is pretty ill prepared for it. But I believe that that given where we are, it's perhaps the only way we can deliver what people voted for in a referendum and backed it up in a general election. And if there are a few short-term bumps in the road, hey, we'll be free to do our own thing. I think the European Union has more to lose from this than we do. That is my view.
Conference, the way ahead is clear. We will vote against any reduction in rights, standards, protections, and oppose a deregulatory race to the bottom. Let me say to the country, as it stands, Labour will vote against the Chequers plan or whatever is left of it, and oppose leaving the EU with no deal. And it is inconceivable that we should crash out of Europe with no deal. It would be a national disaster.
Anybody still arguing that threatening to walk away is a negotiating tactic is missing an incredibly crucial point. And that point is that when you threaten to walk away from any other type of negotiation, you revert to and retain the status quo. So to be really simplistic about it, if you and I were negotiating to buy a house, walking away from that negotiation would involve staying in our current home. Do you see? If you and I were negotiating to buy a car, a new car, walking away from that negotiation would involve keeping our current car. What the European Union exit negotiations involve, if anybody moots the notion of walking away without a deal, that would involve burning down your own house and then entering into negotiations to buy a new one and then threatening to walk away and make yourself homeless. It would involve driving your current car to the dealership, watching it get pulped in the scrapping machine, and then starting negotiations to buy a new car. At the point of which you pull out of those negotiations, you're left with absolutely no idea of how you're ever going to get home. So I understand why intelligent people have made this mistake, but it's very, very important to give them the room and the understanding that they need to acknowledge the mistake. Negotiations where you threaten to withdraw only work when what you withdraw to is clear and defined. And 99 times out of 100, it will be clearly defined as the status quo, i.e. membership of the European Union. So you threaten to walk away and keep what you've got. If you're threatening to walk away without any understanding or knowledge at all of what you're going to get, you are, well, either, shall we say, pathologically optimistic or bonkers.
When that vote takes place, I hope that every Member of Parliament will think about the national interest, will think about the importance of delivering for the people on the Brexit vote. We must deliver Brexit for people, but also will think about doing that in a way that protects jobs, protects our security, protects our people's livelihoods and our United Kingdom. The deal that I've agreed with the European Union delivers on all of those elements. It delivers on the key issues on Brexit that people voted for, like an end to free movement, an end to the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice, not sending vast annual sums to Europe anymore. And it also protects people's jobs, and that people don't want to go back to uncertainty and division. And it's that uncertainty and division that would happen if if Parliament does not support this deal.
Well, you know, I really hope that colleagues will listen very carefully over the next few days of debate. There's been an awful lot of misunderstandings about what's in the withdrawal agreement and in the political declaration. And the truth of it is that there isn't a majority for a particular solution in Parliament. And the Prime Minister has been clear. She has negotiated as hard as she believes is feasible, is realistic with the European Union. It's been a very tough negotiation. I know for many of my Brexit colleagues, and of course for me too, the issue of the backstop is a very concerning one. And that is a matter of political risk. Will we end up in it? And I think what should be clear...
Just on that, Ms Leadsom, you have concerns about the backstop, but as things stand, you agree with the deal?
Yes, I'm not happy about the backstop, but what I was going to say is it is a matter of political risk. The EU also very much do not want the backstop. What it does is it gives the UK access to EU markets without free movement, without making any contributions to their budget, without the common fisheries policy and without the common agricultural policy. So EU 27 are not happy about that. Okay.
I'm sorry to interrupt again. I'm being so horribly ungallant, but it does rather sound to me that you would prefer if the Prime Minister lost on Tuesday, went to Brussels and renegotiated the deal.
I'm not saying that at all. What I'm asking is for colleagues to listen very carefully to the proposals over the next few days in the run-up to the meaningful vote, to be absolutely clear what is being talked about in this deal. For me, the reason why I can live with this deal and support this deal is because it's the only deal on the table, and it's my political assessment that it's unlikely that we would find ourselves in that backstop.
The important bit is after those many hours of discussion, the Cabinet's position was singular, it was united, and we are presented with a proposal that we're going to take to the EU which protects the fundamental elements of the Brexit vote. So we are going to regain control of the money, so we're not going to be sending these big chunks of money over to the EU every year. We're going to be taking back control of our borders, and British courts, British judges, British parliamentarians will be sovereign.
This latest proposal, backed by the Cabinet, the now new Cabinet of Theresa May, could the Labour Party ever get behind it?
Look, what we need to get behind is a negotiated deal with the European Union. We've set out our own view that we need a new customs union. What this proposes is a halfway house towards one. What we've said is we want a comprehensive, strong arrangement with the single market. This does not provide that. This does not talk about what is 80% of the UK's economy, services. And I think perhaps what it fails to realise is that when they're talking about negotiating new agreements around the world and the freedom to do those, if you are bound by the rule book on goods, if you are bound by that rule book, but you say, well, we can still have freedom in terms of services, if you're trying to export those services into a market which wants to export to you their goods, then actually there is a problem there because there's an asymmetry. So we have real issues with the way in which this deal has been put together, really to try and create unity within the Conservative Party and not to look at what is in the best interests of our economy in the UK in a future relationship with the EU.
You tweeted yesterday that the future of the country and the Conservatives depends on Brexit, meaning Brexit. Under this deal, does Brexit still mean Brexit?
Well, I think this deal raises a number of questions. So far we've seen 3 pages out of 120, and we will have to find out what the details mean. For example, a common rule book. Now, on day one, that common rule book is the common rule book of the European Union, is the acquis communautaire as it applies to goods including agri-foods. How will that change? How will it become a joint rule book between the UK and the EU? There's the absolutely crucial point on due regard paid to EU case law as the UK courts interpret this agreement. What does that mean? What role does that give for the European Court of Justice? And then on the customs arrangement, if we're the tax collector for the EU, how are they going to regulate that? Will it bring OLAF in? Will it bring a new regulatory body into the UK, well, an existing regulatory body, and give it standing in the UK?
These are all important and interesting questions, but they're detailed ones. Only yesterday, or the day before, when the plan was leaked, you said this is not Brexit and the government should rip it up. Now, they haven't. They've endorsed it. So what's changed?
Hold on. What I said should be ripped up was a specific page that was reported saying that if we did this, we wouldn't be able to do a trade deal with the United States.
Well, do you believe that we would, under this, be able to do a deal with the United States?
But that is a page of the 120-page report that I haven't yet seen whether it's still there or not. So that's why I'm being slightly cautious. But to be absolutely clear, this will require legislation. And if when we get the detailed legislation, it turns out that it's a punishment Brexit, that it is keeping us in the European Union in all but name, I will stick to the Conservative Party's manifesto commitments and will not vote for it. So that's why we've got to wait and see what the detail says and whether this is Brexit meaning Brexit, in which case many people will be willing to go along with it, or whether in fact it means that we're losing the advantages of Brexit, not getting the freedoms that we were promised, and being tied in to an arrangement that means we're a rule taker.
Now, it's clear to me, Mr. Rees Mogg, that you've significantly changed your tone over the space of a couple of days. Now, no doubt because all the Cabinet Brexiteers have now signed up to a plan that they too condemned in private just 24 hours ago. Have you spoken to anybody who was at that Cabinet meeting to discover what on earth went on?
No, I haven't had the opportunity to do that.
Do you think they were right to stay in the Cabinet?
Well, I can't say whether they were right or not until I've seen the full detail of the papers. That's the issue, is that do the papers as a whole, the whole 120 pages of it, indicate a reasonable Brexit that commits to answers the Prime Minister's promises, or have the red lines been turned pink?
Well, let's look at one of your specifics, the Common Rule Book. The Common Rule Book, we don't need the detail. Do we know what the Common Rule Book means? What it means is effectively staying in the single market for goods. So people who are hoping, manufacturers who sell most of their goods outside the EU and might have been hoping for a different set of rules to allow them to compete with people in China, for example, will not be allowed to do it. They will have to stick to European rules. Does that mean Brexit means Brexit?
If your interpretation is correct, it would also make trade deals almost impossible, because we would be applying those rules to goods coming into the UK, and in trade deals non-tariff barriers are more important than tariff barriers, and we need to have the flexibility to accept equivalence of rules from other nations, that to say that other nations have standards that may be achieved differently but achieve the same end result. If your interpretation is correct, that is not something that when it comes to legislation I will vote for. I will stick to the Conservative Party's manifesto commitments, because this is where the advantages of Brexit come from, dealing with the 90% of growth that's coming from outside the European Union in future decades.
If every newspaper and every commentator is right that this represents what people often call a soft Brexit, in other words, something rather close to many of the arrangements we currently have with the EU, would you believe that such a deal was better or worse than no deal at all?
No deal is better than a bad deal. And the thing to remember,
but this deal,
if we put this
deal is what matters.
Well, we don't have all the details on this detail.
It is possible that this deal is worse than no deal, is it?
As with eggs, an egg that is very softly boiled isn't boiled at all. A very soft Brexit means we haven't left, we simply are a rule taker. That is not something that this country voted for. It's not what the Prime Minister promised. The Prime Minister will, I'm sure, stick to her word. That is crucially important. But I will certainly stick to the Conservatives' manifesto commitments and will not vote for something that doesn't deliver Brexit.